I'm trying to stay calm. Joining us in the studio to discuss this further, TalkTV's chief political editor, Peter Cardwell, and down the line, former private secretary to Margaret Thatcher, Caroline Slocock. Caroline, good morning. Peter, good morning.
Good morning.
Pete, we spoke last week in detail about how, this is a Labour Party that is 20-plus points in front. If Sunak does anything, he gets criticised. And we talked about how the Labour Party would have a light shone and people would want more meat on the bone. Tell me I'm wrong, because you're the expert. This is either very brave or this is a massive, massive mistake. Keir Starmer is saying, and I quote, that basically the Tory Party have used this wokeness, if you like, the thing that we all know exists in this world, and he's doing that to stir up division. Yeah. Is this brave or is it stupid?
He's creating a culture war on the culture war, essentially. It's interesting. He's done this before. He said that about a month ago, actually. He said the Conservative Party, many Conservative politicians, acting more like Donald Trump than Winston Churchill, as he put it. And he did it earlier in 2023 as well, about the middle of the year. He's mentioned this before. The two key charges, one is about the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, which people give money to, and then it's often been given money to other charities abroad and not focusing efforts here in the UK. And also Nigel Farage called them a taxi service for migrants in terms of people coming across the channel because they rescue people or bring them across the channel, as he would say.
From French water.
From French water. The National Trust as well is another very controversial institution which Keir Starmer talks about in this speech. Now, it is often in the last couple of years been focusing a lot on colonialism, the legacy of colonialism, slavery and so on, in a lot of its properties, and teaching that and saying that is the most important thing, or one of the most important things anyway, that we should think about when we go to National Trust properties. National Trust is a huge organisation, far bigger numbers of people are members of the National Trust in this country than are members of any political party, all of them combined. So this is an interesting institution to kind of defend, although there's been a big row within the National Trust for a number of years. But certainly this is a big issue in terms of the wokeness in our agenda. But he's saying that this is created, this is confected, we should be talking about the economy, should be talking about the cost of living.
This is going to create the line that everybody wants between the Tory Party and the Labour Party, isn't it?
In what way?
This woke argument. If Starmer says this is just the Tories being divisive, I would respectfully suggest a huge number of traditional Tory voters would go, yes, this country has gone too woke. We don't look after her and we spend our time virtue signalling when we should actually be dealing with... I don't know, but I would see that as a line.
I think you're right. I think a lot of people will see that, and they will see that Keir Starmer is often on the side of what people see as woke, and that the Conservatives are not. But Keir Starmer is saying this isn't important and we shouldn't talk about it. So that's a very interesting thing that he is doing. I think a thing that people will find a lot of trouble with.
Let's bring in Caroline. Thank you so much for joining us. Caroline, does this sort of view of the Labour Party represent you? This kind of, we're going to come out and say, we want a society of service. That kind of makes sense. But then it's been so politicised in what Peter's saying, kind of like a culture war on the culture war.
I think I'm very much in favour of what Keir Starmer is saying. And, what I'm seeing in the culture wars is a trashing, really, of the reputations of some of the institutions which really make Britain great. There have been ministers as part of the culture wars trashing the BBC, trashing charities, trashing the civil service, trashing the courts. And it's really undermining, I think, of what we all treasure in Britain. And that, I mean, obviously, I can see from this discussion that TalkTV and TalkTV's audience probably feel quite differently to me. But I'd like to put the opposing case.
That's important, Caroline. It's very important.
Yeah, I do think that what he's trying to do, what he's talking about, is trying to bring people together rather than pulling them apart. And that's actually how you do government. The big social issues that we face, whether it's poor health or the environment, a whole raft of issues, we need to pull together, not pull each other apart. And of course, there are failings, here and there. There will always be, issues of, individual instances where you can point to the BBC being biased in one way or another, or the National Trust perhaps not doing the right thing. But millions of people support these institutions. The RNLI volunteers put their lives
Can I jump in, Caroline, and tell you that my mother, God rest her soul, worked for the RNLI and she would be turning in her grave. Can I ask you something? Because you're right, there needs to be both sides. You worked for Margaret Thatcher. Many people, I don't know whether you agree with her politically, but many people will say that was the archetypal person who didn't care whether she was unpopular. When she believed something was unfair, she stood up for what she believed was right and shouted about the things that were wrong. Much as you quite rightly adhere to and say there are millions of people that support these organisations, Karen, I think people will miss the point if they don't understand that in this country there are millions and millions of people who are struggling to get by, who are struggling with everyday life, who are fed up with a society that seems to spend its life dealing with stuff that isn't, sadly, as important as the pound in their pocket and them getting back for what they put in. And I think what I meant when I said about Starmer, he's finding a very defining line. If I was Rishi Sunak, I'd be taking the opposite view right now. I genuinely would. Thatcher would have.
What I would say is that she believed in actually getting on with the job. She worked really hard, day in, day out, mastered the detail, actually made things happen.
Yeah.
And at the same time, she did wage a campaign against homosexuality, Section 28. She even used it as a political dividing line. But she was against the tide of time. If you look at the British social attitudes survey, you'll see that there have been massive changes. Britain is woke. It believes in gay marriage. It believes in fairness and equal opportunity.
I don't think that's woke, though. I don't think it's woke to believe in things like same-sex marriage, for example.
I think that's what most people do.
What I'm saying is that these things, years ago looked controversial, and now we all accept them. And I think that
Caroline,
to keep people together. But she was going against the tide of history, and you are going against the tide of history by bashing on about these woke issues. And the government is not doing its job. It's pushing this rhetoric.
So when you say we're going against the view, do you not understand that there are millions of people, as I just said, in this country who are sick and tired of hearing about a National Health Service, apparently skin, but spends hundreds of thousands of pounds a year employing diversity managers and sending people on courses so that they don't upset people or they announce their right pronouns? What I'm saying is that does not benefit society. People are angry about that. They are.
Actually, having a workplace where people work together is very important. Just look at Dominic Cummings. Just look at what he was saying about a senior civil servant with whom he's working in the biggest crisis that we've faced in decades, calling her a word beginning with C and ending with T. That tears workplaces apart. We need inclusive workplaces where people respect each other. And that's what diversity and inclusion is about. I'm a former chief executive of the Equal Opportunities Commission. I have seen, how badly people are treated in workplaces. It's important that government, which receives the taxpayers' money, behaves well, and you create toxic workplaces if you don't get that right.
Pete?
It is not, it's not just going
Peter,
on some useless thing. It is actually about addressing the real issues of delivery, a workplace that works and policies that work. And the government is pursuing culture wars. It's putting its finger on the wrong buttons of Britain, because actually you should look at the opinion polls and you can see it's not working.
Keir Starmer's singled out two organisations, the RNLI and National Trust. He hasn't talked about sort of the NHS or wider policies. But I wonder, Peter, what you think his strategy is here. Is this an attempt to slightly counteract what we were talking about a lot last week, is that some people see him as quite sort of mild-mannered and boring?
Yes. I mean, this is certainly something that will be controversial. It's certainly something that people will disagree or agree with. It's very interesting. There's another story today, actually. The government is talking about cracking down on activism within the civil service. There are parts of the civil service, the Competition and Markets Authority, an arm's length body, where people have been encouraged to spend half a day a week on things that aren't their actual job in terms of being activists, civil servants. And I think a lot of people just want delivery here. I think Caroline's right in the sense that, yes, of course, workplaces should be inclusive and people should feel happy in their workplace.
It's gone the other way, though, hasn't it?
Well, I think a lot of people feel that there is a lot more activism and a lot more than actually getting the work done.
Taking Rosie's point very quickly before we move on, Lucy, who's the editor of this show, made, I thought, an incredibly salient point this morning in our meeting. she heard or saw or read something that Alistair Campbell was saying the other day. And he was basically saying at this stage when he was running Blair's campaign, they were on the front page every single day. There was a documentary about Starmer the other day. Starmer, very straight down the line, essentially quite boring. Is this an attempt by him and his advisors to get him front and centre and on the front page of newspapers?
Yes, it is. It is absolutely the case. And this is not 1996.
No.
Yes, Starmer is very far ahead. Well, I do notice things. Starmer is very far ahead, 27 points in the most recent poll for YouGov and The Times. But at the same time, people are not talking about his agenda necessarily.
No.
They're talking about the Conservatives' agenda quite a lot. Okay. He wants to get his agenda on the front pages. He's failing to do that, but certainly with this conversation, he'll certainly... We'll certainly got to talk a lot of conversation here at TalkTV.
In this building, and I'm sure, well, at home as well. We'd love to know what you think. Peter, thank you so much. Caroline, really appreciate your time as well.
Thank you, Peter. Very kind. Over to the